FFT Waiver Wire presented by Snickers. Rookie mistake? Maybe you just need a Snickers. Or maybe you just need Darrell Henderson on your fantasy squad. How about his impact for the Rams in his first game back? Some wide receivers to look at as well. Jaxon, Smith-Njigba. And, well, we got what we wanted to see from Emari Demercado and the Arizona Cardinals this past week. What we didn't want to see a couple of weeks ago, wiped out by a good performance this time around. So we hand it to our FFT fellas, Dave Richard and Jamie Eisenberg on Waiver Wire Tuesday.
Thank you, Chris. It is Waiver Wire Tuesday. Busy week for fantasy managers trying to tweak their rosters, Dave. And we know it's not as tough, not some huge injuries that we were dealing with last week, and no teams on a bye. So that's a good place to start as we get everybody set for those waiver wire moves on Tuesday night. We'll start with the quarterbacks here and the ones that we're looking at that unfortunately are still dealing with a few injuries. So we'll show you the ones that are a little bit banged up. Deshaun Watson is day-to-day dealing with that shoulder injury. Jalen Hurts should be fine. No concerns there. Justin Fields out at least one more week. That's the expectation. Ryan Tannehill probably not going to play in Week 8 against the Falcons. We'll see about Daniel Jones and Jimmy Garoppolo. And then you see the guy there at the bottom, Kyler Murray. He's coming back, Dave. And that leads us to the quarterbacks that we're looking to pick up for this week. A guy you might not even be playing in Kyler Murray, but Derek Carr taking on the Colts in a matchup against Gardner Minshew. Those two guys could be potential starters in one quarterback leagues, probably better suited for Superflex and 2 QB leagues. Tyrod Taylor, Tyson Bagent, and Will Levis could be 2 QB/Superflex options. And Mike Vrabel saying for the Titans that it could be a combination of Will Levis and Malik Willis. Good luck trying to figure that out, but I think Willis has shown who he is, and Levis probably has more upside if you're trying to get ahead of it in case Tannehill is maybe not just missing next week, that they decide to move on from him as the starter, as clearly they are looking ahead to the future by trading Kevin Byard. But let's talk about Kyler Murray here. So earliest that the report I saw was Week 10, that they'll try and get him back on the field against the Falcons. Do we like him as a #1 quarterback the minute that he starts, knowing that this Cardinals team has been better than we expected, but still clearly a work in progress?
I don't think he'd be any higher than like 11th or 12th. And there are some matchups that are going to come his way that aren't exactly easy. The Falcons matchup is one that is relatively easy. But then Houston, the Rams, the Steelers, and then he's on bye in Week 14. So I think if you're picking him up, you're stashing and hoping to either see a couple of good games from him and then build confidence that he's your starter, maybe for the fantasy playoffs. But for the most part, I don't think that Kyler Murray is going to immediately be back as a top 8 or top 10 type of fantasy quarterback.
Let me just ask you this, because if it is Week 10 that he is back, we know Mahomes on a bye, Tua's on a bye.
Now that's a good point.
I think it's Stafford's on a bye, and there's one more quarterback on a bye in Week 10 that's relevant.
Jalen Hurts.
Jalen Hurts. So we got 3 big-time quarterbacks and Stafford that are out for Week 10. Would you go right to Kyler Murray as the replacement option if you needed him?
You know, the other options that you'd have are guys like Bryce Young, Derek Carr. You'll take Murray, right? And this brings up another point. I think if your quarterback is on bye in Week 9, if you've got Goff, Lawrence, or Purdy, plan ahead. Go get Gardner Minshew right now. I wouldn't want to start Minshew in Week 8, but in Week 9 against Carolina, be happy to use him then.
All right, so the quarterbacks you might be moving on from, Stafford is on that list. He's just not getting the production that we're looking for from top-tier fantasy quarterback play. Same thing with Geno Smith. Both those guys have a combined 3 games this season with multiple touchdowns and only 2 games with over 20 fantasy points. So despite their pretty productive receiving cores, they're just not getting you the production, again, that you need. Sam Howell coming off a bad game. I know he was good against the Eagles the first time around, but I'm not trusting him this week, and I just don't think that fantasy managers should as well. Running back injuries that we're looking at here, my goodness. Now, some of it is stuff we knew. You know, you have David Montgomery not expected to play, Kyren Williams on IR, Devon Achane still on IR, James Conner, Khalil Herbert still on IR as well. We hope to see Roschon Johnson back this week, and Jerome Ford is going to miss 1 to 2 weeks. Saquon Barkley and Bijan Robinson should be fine. We'll see if Miles Sanders is good to go coming off of the bye week. The running backs that we're looking to add here, and you can put really both Rams running backs on this list, Darrell Henderson and Royce Freeman, but clearly Henderson is the prize. Emari Demercado coming off a strong game for the Cardinals, but tough schedule with the Ravens and the Browns coming up. Again, Ford's going to miss 1 to 2 weeks, so Kareem Hunt should be the guy for Cleveland, but Pierre Strong did lead them in rushing and carries. A season-high carries for Pierre Strong. He did lead them carries in the 4th quarter after Ford left the game. Singletary, who knows if he's the best running back in Houston right now. Kelly, just keep an eye on because of Austin Eckler's ankle injury, and then Chris Rodriguez for maybe a deeper league stash just because he's playing a little bit more than we expected and starting to play a little bit more than Antonio Gibson. So let's talk about the Rams situation, Dave. So no Kyren Williams, no Ronnie Rivers. First game that we saw against the Steelers, it was Darrell Henderson and Royce Freeman. Henderson played 57% of the snaps. Freeman played 43%. They both had double-digit carries, but Henderson did more. He scored a touchdown, but Freeman had a better rushing average, so make sense of it if you can.
They're going to rotate. They're basically exchange series, so Henderson will get a series. When he's tired, Freeman will come in for a play or two, and then the very next series, the exact opposite. Freeman will start, Henderson will come in. But by the second half of the game, I think that the coaching staff kind of leaned toward Darrell Henderson as a running back that they thought had more juice. He was the better pass protector of the two. They were both solid in pass protection. They were both solid overall. But I think Henderson just a little bit better as a pass catcher, as a pass blocker, and obviously a little bit more explosiveness than Royce Freeman, even though the stats suggest otherwise. A lot of the runs that Henderson had, his offensive line did him no favors against the Pittsburgh Steelers. So he is my favorite. But I think getting Freeman right behind him, maybe as a cheaper fab bid, and maybe your second waiver claim, if you end up with him instead of Henderson, I don't think it's that big of a drop-off.
I just don't see him working in the passing game, and as we've seen in their careers, at least you know Henderson on this team once upon a time. 2021 averaged over 13 PPR points per game. The best that Freeman's ever done in his career, you got to go back 7 years ago. 5 years ago.
7 years?
5 years ago.
Been around that long?
5 years. Well, he has been around that long. 5 years ago to Denver, and it was 8.9 points per game. So he's not exactly the best of the duo, despite the fact that he did run for a better average. Again, 12 for 66 for him, 16 for 81 for Henderson. So you would take Freeman over DeMarcado, who looks like he's now the guy in Arizona.
I would. And the reason why is because while he is, I think he's the guy, we thought that 2 weeks ago, and he wasn't the guy. And we know that James Conner, when he comes back, will be the guy. So I don't know how long we're going to feel good about using DeMarcado as a fantasy option. And oh, by the way, Jamie, they play the Ravens in Week 8, they play the Browns in Week 9, they play the Falcons in Week 10. So those first two games, you almost are happy that James Conner is going to miss. DeMarcado will get in there. He'll have a terrible rushing average. Maybe he catches 3 or 4 passes in each of those games. You're hoping for around 8 to 10 PPR points. I'd like to think that you can do better with Royce Freeman, even with Freeman sharing with Henderson.
Yeah, I'll take DeMarcado. First off, I'm not happy that James Conner's not playing. I would like to have James Conner out there, even in a tough matchup. But the number that we saw on the screen there, 4 catches for DeMarcado. Royce Freeman's not doing that. And I think even though they're going to be probably trailing, that's where I think he'll have his opportunities to make some plays. And yes, while 2 weeks ago was extremely frustrating that Keontae Ingram was playing ahead of DeMarcado, and ahead of, I mean, producing more, DeMarcado still led them in snaps. So clearly they like him on the field. They just gave him the opportunity this week. I think he's the second best running back to get after Darrell Henderson. The running backs that you're moving on from for week number 8, and there's some scenarios at play here. First off, we sat up here last week and said, go get Zach Evans, and clearly Sean McVay had different plans, so you could drop Zach Evans now. You could drop Jordan Mason now. He was really more of an emergency situation in case Christian McCaffrey was not going to play. Thankfully, McCaffrey was out there and did well against the Vikings. Again, Antonio Gibson is getting in now a 3-way situation with Brian Robinson Jr. and Chris Rodriguez Jr. I guess you have to be a junior on the Commanders' backfield. And then Dalvin Cook coming off the bye week. I don't think anything's going to change for him as long as Breece Hall's good to go. Cook will be in a shared situation with Michael Carter as the second option there for the Jets. The wide receiver injuries, some notable names here and some guys we have to keep an eye on. So Metcalf, we don't know if he'll return. That'll impact one of the guys we're going to talk about. Deebo Samuel, we know, is not going to play in Week 9. Christian Watson may not play. I'm sorry, not going to play until Week 9 for Deebo Samuel. Christian Watson is something we've got to keep an eye on there with his injury. Jefferson, I got to tell you, Dave, it's encouraging that the Vikings are winning and their schedule looks good because now Jefferson may return when he's eligible with his hamstring injury. Tank Dell should play. Juju hopefully will get back out there. And Zay Jones, same thing. Traylon Burks as well. The wide receivers that we are looking to add. So I alluded to this. DK Metcalf was out. Jaxon Smith-Njigba was fantastic against the Cardinals. Scored a touchdown, first of his career. Josh Downs has been great with Gardner Minshew. Kendrick Bourne has done a nice job with Mac Jones. And then a couple guys you might want to speculate on, Jalen Hyland and Demario Douglas. And then if you need a desperation play, maybe Brandon Cooks has now become the second best wide receiver for the Cowboys. But let's talk about JSN and Josh Downs. So, Dave, we said this coming off the bye that the offensive line was healthier for Seattle, so maybe we see more 3 receiver sets. He had a good first game in Week 6 and a great second game in Week 7, but can he coexist with DK Metcalf to a point where you would feel comfortable with him as a fantasy option?
And that's the whole thing. I don't feel comfortable with that. We've seen plenty of games this year where 2 Seattle wide receivers each have a 20% target share. Usually those two wide receivers are DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, so it's really hard to believe that JSN can break ahead of one of those two guys. But if you told me that DK Metcalf was going to miss multiple games, I'd go crazy for Smith-Njigba. He has the highest target share in a game this season in Seattle, and it was last week, almost 30%. He looked great, just absolute phenomenal talent. It's just a matter of how many targets can you get from week to week when DK's back and when Lockett is there, and then when they're not playing against Arizona. That might have had a little something to do with it too.
The one thing that I do like is that even with Metcalf out, this was the guy that Geno Smith was leaning on, not Tyler Lockett. And so do we start to see Lockett maybe fade a little bit, because this is the future of their receiving corps, Metcalf and JSN. Lockett has probably got maybe a year more at best. And so do we start to see JSN take a step forward as the second guy, and then maybe he could still be relevant? I know you like Josh Downs the best, though, of these rookie wide receivers in the guy stat.
He is so fast, and he runs unique routes. He's not a typical route runner for a rookie. He seems a little bit more advanced than that, and this is an Indianapolis offense that doesn't mind throwing the football with Gardner Minshew. In fact, he's got a great target share in his last 2 games with Gardner Minshew. It's not as good as Michael Pittman's, but it's over 20%. I believe it's right at 22.2%. Last week got the go ball on an offsides. It was a free play for the Colts. He scored on it. Had 2 other plays of 20-plus air yards. He caught both of them. I think that he's got appeal for the rest of the season. Could be a number 3 wide receiver. It's in PPR and half in non-PPR. This is where I might differ and say, okay, JSN ahead of Downs in those 2 formats, because catch is so relevant for Downs. I'm not sure that's going to be there for him, or the yardage will be there for him, I mean to say, in half and non-PPR leagues.
Interesting matchup also for Downs against the Saints this week. Very good secondary for New Orleans. The wide receivers that you're moving on from for this week, and again, some guys that are just struggling. Jameson Williams, 6 targets, no catches, so we'll see if he can pick things up as the season closes, but right now just struggling a little bit. Tutu Atwell, we've seen his targets crater, even though he has 2 touchdowns in the 3 games that Cooper Kupp has played. Last week, for example, against the Steelers, it was a 31-yard reception for his only catch, but he did find the end zone. And Jahan Dotson did have 8 targets, second on the team behind Terry McLaurin, but you see the production's just been very miserable for Dotson, so hard to roster him at this point in the season. Tight ends that we're looking at for this week and the injuries that we're dealing with here. Big one in Buffalo with Dawson Knox. He's going to be out indefinitely after undergoing wrist surgery. We hope to get Luke Musgrave back. He's been good. He's been on the field, but just struggling right now to stay on the field, dealing with a concussion and the ankle injury, 2 of the last 4 games. Pat Freiermuth is on IR. Gerald Everett, we don't know how long he'll be out. Juwan Johnson, might be a good thing that he's staying out for Taysom Hill fantasy managers, and then Greg Dulcich back on IR as well. The tight ends to add, Dalton Kincaid is the prize. Taysom Hill, though, can have some short-term appeal. Ferguson, Thomas, Njoku, you kind of know what to do with those guys. And then deep leagues, Donald Parham, without Gerald Everett, could be good. Hopefully does more than just score touchdowns. But Dave, let's talk about Dalton Kincaid, because, again, coming off a big game, 8 catches, 75 yards on 8 targets against the Patriots, and now there is no Dawson Knox. How good can Kincaid be?
He can be outstanding. He worked as a short area target for Josh Allen, and if Josh Allen is struggling to hit passes downfield, certainly he can be there in short. He's also much better in zone coverage, and I think that you look at him as someone who could be a top 12 tight end rest of season.
Love the setup for him moving forward, and unfortunately you'll be moving on from some of these tight ends if you have to. Cole Kmet, I would drop him, but try and pick him up again when Justin Fields is healthy. Luke Musgrave, again, just banged up right now, so we don't know how long he'll be out. And Tyler Higbee, similar to Tutu Atwell, struggling with Cooper Kupp back on the field. You like these waiver wire options? Check out the Fantasy Football Today podcast wherever podcasts are found. We help you dominate your fantasy leagues like nobody else. We go 7 days a week to help you win your fantasy leagues. The Fantasy Football Today podcast, wherever podcasts are available.